My guest today is Jessica Crow. Jessica is an experienced business leader, consultant and instructor with deep expertise in change management, organizational effectiveness and program management. She founded the consulting and coaching firm Apogy in 2019. Jessica is passionate about helping companies bridge the gap between strategy execution and value creation. But probably more importantly, Jessica is equally passionate about helping people develop conscious change leadership skills. This means that they live and lead differently and a way to create workplaces where people in change thrive. She's also an adjunct professor at Denver University, mentors undergraduate students through the University of Colorado's professional program, and has previously served on the board of directors of the Colorado chapter of the Association for Change Management Professionals. When she has the time, she also instructs people in yoga. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and to see you again, Richard. And I love what you're doing with APMG, from all of the different resources and training and information that you're sharing and putting out in the world. So thank you for having me here. It's a true honor to be here with you.
And it's really great to talk to you because you're someone that lives and breathes this stuff. You're someone
I am in it.
You're in it up to your neck, as they would say.
I am. I love it, though.
So, what strategies are most effective in making sure change can be sustained long after the implementation phase? We often have this buzz when things are being done, but then you've got to get back to the day job, as they say. So, what do you do during that implementation process to make sure it's there for the long term?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, it's worth noting that there is a misconception that once you go live or once the change is implemented, that you're done. And that's really the starting point of change adoption, but more so the long-term sustainment of what you're trying to accomplish. So the best way to sustain a change, the best way that I found over the years through my research, through my own hands-on experience and working with clients, is that you have to operationalize the metrics and measures that are related to that change, the outcomes you're looking for. And this is not adoption. You're not measuring adoption at that point. You are really taking a look at the business outcomes. So if you're implementing a new technology or a process change, yes, adoption is something that you require and need in order for the business outcomes to be achieved, but you need to be able to link the utilization of that new way of working to the business drivers. So if it's a new technology and the vision, the goals for that change were to save time, to drive efficiencies, to whatever it might be, then those are the outcomes you need to be measuring and monitoring as a change management professional, as a change lead in the organization. And if you're not doing that, if you're not measuring the link between the effort and the activities, the interventions that led you to that point of implementation and go live, and if you're not measuring the outcomes and continuing to support and engage that process after the fact, then you're going to see a drop in the business outcomes, or not full you're not going to be able to capture the full value of the investment that you've made.
And do your clients buy into that? Benefits management is a very, very difficult subject, whatever the situation. Most people pay lip service to it. Are you able to convince your clients that it's all about the benefits, and if you don't measure the benefits, you don't know how well you've done? Do they buy into that, or do they shrug and look at you and say, well, that's why we employ you?
Right. The sustainment piece, the benefits management, is one of the hardest pieces. And I truthfully, being intentional and focusing on that measurement of the benefits there is, I wouldn't say pushback in organizations, but when things are moving so quickly, I think that gets swept under the rug because you're moving on to the next change versus taking a look at, did you actually capture the value? And so what I see, from a coaching, if I'm coaching a client, what we're doing at that point is coming up with a sustainment plan. We're putting together a team of people who are looking at the benefits management aspect of that change after the fact. And it could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, it could be ongoing. But one way to ensure that they are sticking and focused on that goal is to embed the measures and metrics into the overall way that the organization measures performance. So you're reporting out on these business outcomes in certain settings. You have a long-term business owner who owns that outcome. And that's my coaching to the client. If when I was on the inside working on the industry side, we would create measures, goals for our team that were aligned with that business outcome that change originally was meant to drive. So I would say, it is hard. It's not meant to be lip service, but if you don't operationalize what you're trying to change, and if you don't tie and create measures for that sustainment, there's a high chance that people could go back to old ways of working, or they could find workarounds, or they could, it's the path of least resistance, right? They're going to do whatever's easiest. So you really have to tie performance goals, business outcomes to the change that you're making.
I mean, it's relatively easy to put in new technology to
Right.
change processes. But how do you change the culture? How do you change that attitudinal thing that you need people to get on board with it? Do you have any hints and tips? What's the key element that you see about making
Yeah.
sure culture change or personal buy-in to what's going on?
Well, truthfully, technology change is culture change. Any sort of change is culture change because people are, the norms of the organization, the way that people work, whether it's, from using tools and systems and processes to the habits and behaviors and the interactions with people in the organization. So culture change, I like to start with that vision, and really coach and advise the clients that I work with, hey, you need a vision for the future, and people have to see themselves in it, and they have to see themselves succeeding in that vision. Because I think intellectually we understand this change may make sense for the organization. We might understand why, but when we're in it and we're on the receiving end of the change, we're an impacted stakeholder, and all of a sudden, even though we know this thing is going to happen, but we're used to our processes, we're used to working with our colleagues in a certain way, we're used to our norms and behaviors. If we can't see ourselves in that future state and being successful and how, what we're doing actually aligns with and matters, at the end of the day, then it's going to create a lot of friction. It's going to create some resistance. So that culture change piece really starts with the leaders who are driving the change, sharing that vision, painting that picture, and being pretty relentless with that conversation with employees. It also means listening. Oh, sorry, were you going to ask a question?
So I'm very interested in this vision piece. So
Yeah.
day one, client says to you, Jessica, can you come in and help us? You walk in, you're standing in front of the board of directors or the senior management team, and you say, right, articulate the vision of what you want to achieve. How many of your clients can actually do that? How long does it take to really pull out from those leaders what the true vision is?
Yeah. I think it depends on the leader. Some have a very clear vision of what they want to accomplish in the organization. I would, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, some of the most effective people who at casting a vision have been with an organization for quite some time. So they understand, they've got all of that context, and they can see that future state. Where I find leaders who are new to an organization, they've been brought in. So I had a client, for example, that they brought in someone from the outside. That person was responsible for implementing data governance across the organization. But what that vision for the future looked like, they were still figuring out the ins and outs of the organization and how things worked in the culture. And so that day one for me and that person, and asking them what was the vision, they had an idea of where they should go, but there was still a lot of gaps, and they couldn't really see how it was all going to come together, how they were going to cast that vision and make it one that people could see themselves in. So that takes time, and it takes a lot of focus. So I think it just depends, to be totally honest, but to accelerate that process, I would recommend to anyone, you have to have conversations and just really spend a lot of time asking questions about how things work today. When you understand the current state really well, the climate, the the interpersonal components of an organization, as well as how everything operates, you're going to be able to cast a much more powerful vision, because you'll be able to explain the delta between where you are and where you're going with much more clarity. And I think whether you're new in an organization or you've been there for a long time, when you can paint that picture that says, I understand this is where we are, this is where we're going and why, you're going to be much more effective. But I think it's really on the back of the person who is new to the organization to spend that time up front, really understanding the way things work. And unfortunately, I see this too often where that understanding of the current state isn't a priority. They know that they need to implement data governance, or they know they want to implement whatever it is, and they're so focused on the benefits of that future state that they're neglecting and respecting the way that people are doing things now. And so they're unable to cast a really compelling vision as a result. So,
I mean, that's very interesting. I read something recently. It's the first time I've heard this, and the quote was that apparently Jeff Bezos said, people ask him what's going to change in 5 or 10 years' time. The question they should ask is what isn't going to change in 5 or 10 years' time.
mm-hmm.
So the argument was, as far as Amazon was concerned, low price, wide choice, faster delivery. They're going to be the constants. So any vision of the future should build around those constants. Is that a common technique that you see in American industry? People saying, these are the constants in our business, so whatever we change, they stay as they are. It's how we adapt to things around them.
Yeah, that's a great quote. And what I'll say is the constants will end up being the core values, or here's what we stand for as an organization. Here's our vision, mission. Those usually end up being more enduring versus changing all of the time. The business model, the way that the products and services, you might see that changing more. So I think companies try to anchor in what they stand for, mission, vision, values. But I will say that component of focusing on what's not going to change is a very powerful lever when you are going through or you aspire to change, because our brains crave stability. Our brains want to be able to predict. And so uncertainty is what creates that resistance. Uncertainty creates fear. Our first concern is ourselves, our well-being, our family. We think about our own future. And if we can say, hey, this is where we're going, but here is what is not changing. Here is what you can continue to expect, whether it's, our mission, vision, values, or our products, or how we do things. That is going to give comfort to the people you are asking to do something differently. It creates a little bit more stability, so then they can think and be more open to, okay, I know this is going to stay like this. I'm willing to try and put in the extra effort required to do this new thing, to think about this in a different way, to change my behavior, to change my mind. So that's a very important tool and lever that change leaders can use.
So which is most important in maintaining stakeholder momentum and engagement? Is it the things that won't change, or is it the things that will change? Is it the anchors, or is it the thing that's going to make a difference into the future? Or is it both of them?
I wish I had a definitive answer, because I would be using that all the time in my work. I think it depends. I think it depends on the individual. I think it depends on the change in the situation and the company. This could be something worth researching, but I think both are important. And that's why when we come up with our strategy and plans and approaches, we have to sort of balance both. Like, what do people need to know to feel comfortable and confident? Some people are going to need to know what's not changing, and some people get really excited and motivated about the promise and the potential of what the future state has to offer. And because I don't know what people are going to need in that moment, you got to give both, I suppose. And that's what I have done in my own work. But what an interesting, if you find that out, let me know, because that's what I'll start doing moving forward.
If I find it out, I'll probably make a fortune first, and then I'll share it with you. But does that mean that managing stakeholders, then that whole stakeholder management piece becomes much more complex, because clearly
Absolutely.
different groups of stakeholders are going to be motivated by different things.
Absolutely. And that is what I think sets change management as a practice apart, is the stakeholder management and engagement. And, I teach this a lot. And you mentioned, in my bio, this concept of conscious change leadership. It's a blend of mindfulness and leadership skills, and connection is the starting point. Your ability to build relationships and leverage those relationships, because all change goes through people, right? To get implemented. And so your relationships with your colleagues, with your employees, with your peers, if you have strong relationships, you're going to likely be more effective at leading and influencing and accelerating the change process than if you don't have that strong connection piece. Which personally, I love that, because in the age of AI and more technology and things happening that don't require the human touch, we really need to think about how we're going to get good at doing those things that do require human interaction, which is that connection piece. So I think, for what it's worth, the stakeholder engagement, understanding people's preferences and using your emotional intelligence and really developing your people skills is going to make you so much more effective when you're trying to implement something transformational or even just small changes in the workplace.
We usually have the traditional KPIs. I mean, you mentioned earlier about benefits management. What are the other indicators we can use to measure change initiative success and value creation? Is there a way of actually measuring that motivation, measuring that engagement between people?
Yeah, and I think a few ways that are maybe not common KPIs, but you could take a look at the speed with which change is being implemented. How many change initiatives are you able to successfully implement in an organization? That really speaks to the agility, the adaptability of the organization, because change management is done well. I always think about end user satisfaction and sentiment, because that'll sort of tell you whether or not the motivation, the engagement was there. What are some other things that could be helpful here? I think from an external perspective, brand perception, when you've got happy, productive employees and changes happening and you're innovating and you're growing, you'll see that in the customer experience and the perception of the organization. So those are things that you could measure that maybe you wouldn't think about as being linked to, change management. Those are just some off the top of my head, but hopefully that was responsive.
It's really good. Do you have, from your teaching, from your reading, from your research, can you think of a sort of a poster chart of a great organizational change? I mean, we've seen the whole thing about IBM move from a technology company into basically a management consultancy. My words, not necessarily yours. Who would you look at and sort of say, that's an amazing way that organization's gone from being one type of organization into another?
That's a good question. Let me think about that, because there's many organizations that I have supported where I think they're doing things well, but that total transformation of the business model and having that work out. Netflix is one, right? From going from their boxes to the on-demand. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so that's a good point. So I think what I was thinking of was when the pandemic happened, many organizations were forced to rapidly change their business model. And then you've got all the digital collaboration tools that made that possible. But if there's one that stands out, I mean, obviously Netflix, that's a great example. And I would say any, one that didn't go well, obviously, was Blockbuster, but that had nothing to do with the pandemic.
Kodak went the other way as well.
Yeah, Kodak went the other way. Any of the retailers that went from mostly brick and mortar into online, I think that would have been another example. But I apologize for not having like a clear case study around an organization that has made that transition very smoothly and in a public way. What other ones are coming to mind for you?
Well, I suppose I can't really think of any examples, but what seems to sort of come to mind to me is that it's the external environment that allows the organization to make the change. Mm-hmm. So all of those transformations, are because you can now tie into, say, the internet. You can tie into digital. You can tie into AI. You could tie into online payment.
Right.
And it's the ability to say, using that external environment and the capability it now offers me, which it didn't offer, say, 10 years ago, I can now do this with my business.
Yeah.
And it's that willingness to use the external stuff. I mean, we've seen in the news lately about the Chinese AI
Right. With
tool come to
AI.
market.
Right.
And someone's now saying it's a blockbuster, it's a radical change. But they're coming in with an AI tool based on the innovation and the early development done by the American tech companies. So
Right.
are they innovators or are they actually followers?
And part of that was when I was doing some reading on that. The reading that I was doing said, and I forget the source. I think it was like 1440. That the reason that they were able to get to where they are is that they had to, because the number of chips
Yeah,
being sent to China was less, and so they figured it out as a means of survival in many ways. And I think, is that innovation or following? I don't know. It clearly worked though. But, environment does play a big role.
yeah.
Kind of going back to the pandemic, I was working in the healthcare space, and telemedicine was this future state vision that was just 10 years out, right? And the incentives weren't aligned. The environment wasn't aligned. All of these different things weren't aligned. And so it wasn't a huge priority. Then the pandemic happened and suddenly nobody could go and see their providers. Telemedicine in a year became a thing, and now it is widely used. And so environment, external factors play a huge role. Internal factors play a huge role too. But like with the case of the Chinese company, deep work or deep seek or something like that,
DeepSeek, yeah.
they had their factors, they used those to their advantage because they had to, in order to to figure, I'm guessing, things out. So yeah, it's an interesting question why we change. Sometimes we change because we have to, or forced to, because of our constraints. External factors. Truly, that motivation to change because we see the benefits. It's probably harder if we don't have that that motivator that's really pushing us along. It's probably going to take a little bit longer unless we can figure out, how to bring people to the table in a way that allows them to want to be competitive, want to maintain that competitive advantage, and see the value in the services and the products that they're providing to people.
Fascinating. It's not easy, is it? It's not
No,
easy in
no,
this
that's what makes change
situation.
so fun and complex.
And I think it will only ever get more and more complex.
I agree with you, but that, I'm here for it. I'm along for the ride.
It's great talking to you, Jessica. Great
Thank
catching
you
up,
so
and many
much. It was
thanks for
great
your
talking
time.
with you too.
Thank you.